All right, guys, here we go. All right, you should be able to hear me now. Can you hear me now? Hmm. I think you can. Somebody give me a heads up that you can hear me. Test, test, test. No. Hmm. Okay, good. All right. All right. So yeah. So we created this fund, and I'll explain the little genesis of this fund, why this fund exists, and what we're doing with it. A couple months ago, maybe it was a month ago, um, Michael Saylor made the observation that the 10% coming from STRC was actually far better than 10% because it's a return of capital. And I think it caught everybody by surprise. I remember that, even Josh Mandel was like, wait a second, is this true? Wait, that changes everything. And it is true. And, it made me sort of think twice. I was like, what? Is that possible? And yeah, of course it is possible. And basically the IRS sort of says, listen, if you haven't made money in a fund and you just you're turning money, you're paying out money that you haven't made money on. There's no gains. Well, then it's a return of capital, and that just lowers your basis. And at some point, your basis gets zero, and you sell. At that point, it's fully taxable. So it's a tax deferred. It's not a tax of you don't avoid tax, you defer tax, right? And that's a great solution for it's a great solution for providing income, right? So STRC really is it's a great income tool. Basically you're deferring income on STRC until you finally sell your STRC. So let's just say you have it for 10 years, it pays 10%. Well, let's just go over what happens. Year one, let's say I start with $1 million, right? And I know it's paying a little higher than 10% now, but let's just say 10%. It's easy to do. I start with $1 million. I put $1 million in STRC. I get, let's say, 10% a year. So I get 100 grand a year. And in year 10, I decide to sell my STRC. Well, I get at that point, right? I have a taxable event. And I've lowered my basis down by getting 10% every year. So at that particular time, it will look like to the IRS that I have now made $1 million, and that'll be taxed at capital gains rates. So so you're going to owe some money at the very end, right? It's not like you're going to get there and you're going to go tax free. You're going to owe some money, and of course you're going to get your initial capital back, and you're going to owe some money on it. So it's you're going to owe, let's say, 30% on it, state and federal, depending on your state. So anyways, I was thinking about this and I was like, well, this is really interesting. I wonder if you could do this in a way where you also kept the upside of Bitcoin. Now, Saylor's got one of these STRs, which is STRK, I believe. And STRK says, well, we're going to pay you this dividend, and then you get conversion into shares of MSTR at MSTR 1000. Well, that's not bad, but MSTR has to hit 1,000 before that's even in the money. So if it gets to 990, basically the option is worthless. So it's a little bit like having a perpetual call option. And I think it's interesting. It's an interesting idea, right? But it's still not like owning Bitcoin. So I got thinking, and of course, there's also the basis risk between MSTR and Bitcoin, which is, historically been not negligible, right? I mean, MSTR has gone from 3x NAV to essentially 1 NAV, right, over the last 7 months. And, so there's been huge variation. Could it go below NAV? Potentially, right? I mean, some of these things in the past have traded as much as, 45% discount to NAV, and in particular GBTC has. So anyways, I'm digressing a little bit, but I want to give you a little bit of the context. I was wondering, could we do something more directly connected with Bitcoin as opposed to using this sort of financial alchemy due to MSTR shares? And I came up with this idea, which we have now launched into a fund, and it's a very simple fund idea. And I'm kind of doing it partly because I wanted to do this for myself. And the idea is very simple. So the idea is investors come in, they contribute fiat or Bitcoin to the fund. They have to be accredited investors. This is not for non-accredited investors. You contribute fiat or a Bitcoin to the fund. The Bitcoin also has to come from Coinbase or Fidelity. That's we are required to do that by our auditors. And then it gets valued every month. And then basically at this point, every month we borrow roughly 1% of the net asset value of the fund. And I say net asset value, not really net asset value, the initial contributions of the fund, to pay the investors a very stable, completely stable dividend of 10% of the value that they invested, irrespective of where Bitcoin is, right? So as an example, you come in, you put in $1 million into this fund, and you will get $100,000 year one, divided into 12 even increments, right? So $8,333 per month. And it doesn't matter whether Bitcoin's up, down, doesn't matter. You're going to get that amount. Now, where does that yield come from? Well, it comes from, we borrow against the Bitcoin, and we put up only a very small fraction of the Bitcoin on different lending platforms. And we will go wherever we can borrow Bitcoin the cheapest, right? So, and it could be Bitcoin, it could be IBIT, it could be FBTC, or it could even be wrapped Bitcoin on Ethereum, right? So we can borrow on a number of different platforms, and we will go wherever we can borrow, and only using short-term borrowing, because anybody could redeem this with a month's notice. So we can't lend the Bitcoin out longer than, till the end of the month. We only will lend it out to the extent that we need to pay that month's dividend. So if you think about it, initially, year one, the first month, which is really January, you're going to be paying out 1% of the fund. So the fund will have loan to value of 1%, right? Month two, if Bitcoin stays exactly the same, 2%. Month three, 3%, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, if you think about this over a period of 10 years, right? And you just looked at it just from the point of view of one investor, the investor puts in $1 million. At the end, they're going to get 100 grand a year back for 10 years. So they're going to get all their money back in 10 years. And evenly, right? And at that point, their taxes are going to be due. Now, in order to generate the $1 million of yield that we're going to be paying, we're going to have to borrow $1 million, right? So what is the total amount of borrowing with interest over 10 years? Well, let's just say it's somewhere under $2 million, $1.7 million. It depends on the interest rates, right? But something like $1.7 million we will have to borrow over the years. But where do we think Bitcoin will be in 10 years? We think Bitcoin will be 10x, let's say. So there should be a residual of $8 million left at the end of 10 years. And there you can see why this is so much better than just holding STRC, for example, because you get pretty much the same kind of interest payments, the same tax deferral, actually even more transparency, because you can look at it every single day. You can see on a dashboard where the Bitcoin is, where the borrowing is every day, so you can see it. And then at the end of 10 years, you have pretty much the same Bitcoin as it has not been touched, right? And you just have to pay off at that point the loan of $1.7 million, and you'll pay the fund managers, Fred and Ben, our percentage on just the excess profits. If you don't have excess profits, you won't pay us anything. And you'll get, essentially $8 million back on your $1 million. So you get $1 million, you get the entire $1 million back over 10 years, and you make $8 million afterwards in a lump sum. It's a pretty good deal. It's a lot better than STRC if you really believe in Bitcoin. Now, yeah, some people don't, they want to keep the fixed income things separate. Other people like me want to hold Bitcoin. And hey, Josh, we want to hold Bitcoin. We don't want to sell our Bitcoin, and we want to. We still need or want. The two are kind of similar, but we want to get a steady income for a lot of planning purposes. So listen, I put over $5 million into this fund, so 60 Bitcoin worth and some fiat into this fund. And, I am going to get, over 50 grand a month paid to me. And this, it's, hey, Jacob. And so this is a good way for me to kind of cover, most of my living expenses. I don't have a private jet quite yet, but, if I did, I could always put more money in the fund, increase the dividend, and I could always leave the fund and jump back in. And also, if Bitcoin's doubled, instead of getting 50 grand a month, I'll get 100 grand a month, right? So I could do that too. So the point of this thing is this is a structure where you can effectively do the one thing that you can probably do, you should be doing against your Bitcoin, which is borrowing against your Bitcoin. And also you can outsource the borrowing to Ben, to me, and to various people who are, looking at this thing and have full transparency into what we're doing, and can even advise us and, hey, you should go here to borrow, you should go there to borrow, etc. So basically, we're sort of centralizing the borrowing aspect of this and making sure that, for example, no tax is being, hey, JWH, is being hit because you're moving, say, from Bitcoin to wrap Bitcoin, which is a taxable event, for example, right? But, I do think that wrap Bitcoin, is not a bad way to go. Right now, it's not a bad way to go. And I'll give you an example. Let me just see if I can show you what I mean by this. Let me look at, oh no, that's not what I want. Well, I was just going to look at Aave, but it's pretty remarkable. Yeah, Aave right now. Let's take a look at Aave. So just so not all Bitcoiners are aware of this world. Let's just see if this works. Okay, so this is Aave, right now. So, if you go right now on Aave, you can supply WBTC as an asset, right? And if you're borrowing Tether, right? If you're borrowing Tether, you can borrow Tether at 3.92%. So you can basically borrow Tether at under 4% on Aave if you supply wrapped Bitcoin into Aave. So I just wanted to point that out. And why do I point that out? Well, that's something that exists right now today. It's very cheap to borrow against your Bitcoin on Aave. So a lot of people are making a lot of big deal that that Saylor is so intelligent that he's borrowing at 10%. Well, you can borrow at 4% on Aave. Now, this will get liquidated in the middle of the night if you're not too careful and you're just shaving the margin. You're right at the edge. It gets automatically liquidated. There's nobody to call, nothing, right? So you have to be pretty careful with these things. And if you're getting closer to the danger zone, you got to put more money into Aave so you don't get liquidated. So anyways, that's the first thing. And second of all, how do you do this without, if you've got regular Bitcoin, without creating a tax event? You don't. So part of the strategy here is, as money comes into this fund, we're putting some of it in WBTC, some of it in BTC, and eventually we'll put it into things like HiBit or FBTC as well if there's advantageous lending on those platforms. So the way we see our role is not trading, but it is to be as smart as we can with borrowing against these funds. And so, we could be, for example, borrowing using Arch Lending. We know those guys. But we aren't going to pay, a 1% origination fee because we can't pay an origination. We're not locking ourselves in for a year or anything. This has to be all short-term borrowing. So, we're completely agnostic as to how to do it, but we want to obviously not put it all in one place. We want to be super transparent about everything we do. And anyways, that's the sort of general idea of the fund. And we have this website, which you can see, fund. Let's see if we can show this website. Hold on one second. Okay, so we have this website here. Yeah, so this is this website that we built for this fund, and you can read about it at 2718.fund, and you can take a look. We're limited to 100 investors. We're limited to accredited only. We're limited to U.S. investors only. There's a bunch of regulatory things that we are doing, but and we built a bunch of software to manage this fund as well. So we have a complete portal that we designed. We built multi-sig wallets for handling anything that's outside of something like Fidelity Digital Assets, where we plan to keep most of the money, most of the Bitcoin, which is the same place that Saylor keeps most of his Bitcoin. So again, this is sort of a passive fund. It's meant to be very passive. It's not meant to be an active fund at all. And it's up and running. And, if you're interested in finding out more, hit me or hit Ben an email. And, we can talk through any of the details, the auditors, the tax implications, all the rest. and how it compares to other things. It may not be for you. So it, you know, it it's not for everybody, but a lot of us, I think one of the things that was that I kind of got out of last year was is that a lot of us, we all believe in Bitcoin longer term, but we also, a lot of us have financial needs, and the question is, are we going to be selling our Bitcoin? And do you sell your Bitcoin, you know, to meet your daily needs, or um, or do you not? Now, in this book, Bitcoin 1 Million, my view is this: is if you're young, you're making money, you don't need any of this stuff, right? Really, um, because if you got a high-paying job and you can just put all your money away, just pop it into cold storage. Perfect. You don't need loans, you don't need leverage, you don't need any of this stuff. Um, but if you're getting to be an old dinosaur like me, I think having a steady source of income is advisable. Even if you have a lot of Bitcoin, even if you have a lot of Bitcoin, I think the idea of borrowing against that Bitcoin can be very beneficial. So it all depends on your tax state, your where you live, everything, your age, etc. But yeah, that's about it. WBTC is not Bitcoin. I agree, WBTC is not Bitcoin, but you know what? It's tracked Bitcoin perfectly so far, and I think the risk of WBTC depegging on Bitcoin over the next year or two, in my view, is pretty low. Having said that, we are going to be buying WBTC to some extent. Not most of it. Most of it will be regular Bitcoin. But if you're overly concerned about WBTC, do not invest in this fund. I would say the risk or downsides. Well, the risk is this. The risk is we go into a massive bear market, and this happens somewhere in year 4 or 5 of the fund, and and we it's pretty much the same risk as kind of as Bitcoin treasury companies. Is we get to the point where we can't issue any more dividend, number one. So what happens is, once you get to 25%, that's sort of the initial trigger, and the absolute max kind of contractually is 35%. We can't pay a dividend anymore, right? We do not want to be paying dividends if the value of your loans exceeds 35% of your Bitcoin. I don't think that's stable. So in that particular case, we just delay paying the dividends, and we suspend them, and we will recoup them once Bitcoin increases, and therefore that number decreases. How do you convert WBTC to BTC? Well, how do you do that? Well, hold on one second. Let me take Ben. Ben. Yo, I'm doing a space right now. You want to hop in? I did. I'll call you back in a second. Bye. Okay. Yeah. So how do you convert WBT? There's a bunch of ways you can do it, and there's costs of doing it, right? So, if you do it on something like SFOX, the costs are pretty low, but if you're doing it on, you can't just go, here's my Bitcoin, contractually give me WBTC, and vice versa. It doesn't work like that. Yeah. SOFR plus 0.5. That's okay. So SOFR plus 0.05 is roughly where Aave is, right? So that's an example. So we are opening in the fund's name with Interactive Brokers, And so that's not bad, right? SOFR plus 0.05. And that's against ETFs, right? So now then you have to put your money in ETFs. And again, unfortunately, now there is a how do you call it? There's a tax event when you move money between Bitcoin and ETFs. So, again, you can do all this stuff on your own, but if you want something that gives you a cash flow of like a pure income, you can convert. You can convert from WBTC. There's a fee, and you can't do it at Bitco. I agree with that. Can it survive a massive Bitcoin drawdown? I think it can. But bear in mind, just think about doing it on your own, this exact strategy, and then ask yourself, can the same strategy survive a massive Bitcoin drawdown? I would say it can, but let's just take an extreme case, right? Of Bitcoin going down 80%, for example, right? Let's take that case. If you look at that case, okay, first of all, can you survive 80%? Well, you can if you hold your Bitcoin, and could any kind of leverage fund survive an 80% drawdown? Again, our target is 25% maximum to Bitcoin to NAV. We may never get to that point, right? Because if Bitcoin goes up and then goes down, you're still not going to be there. So, it's very unlikely that this thing blows through. We've gone through many, many different variations on this. So the details are very clear. So you can see this. More information, strategic reserve for K2. All this stuff's available. Hey, Josh, if you want to find out more, you can certainly go to this fund. We can send you more information. We have, very detailed information on this fund. Fund is live, including we have, scenario things for what if this thing happens? What if this thing happens? All these things have been analyzed. Bitco does not allow you to do that. I mean, if you're whatever, they work with these providers, sort of similar to unauthorized participants in ETFs. But have I ever taken any profit? No. With Bitcoin, no. I've only bought Bitcoin, so I've never sold Bitcoin, and I don't want to sell my Bitcoin, right? So that's my thing, right? So listen, I'm up 20x on my Bitcoin since I bought it effectively. And, I don't want to sell my Bitcoin. I want to keep my Bitcoin all the way to Bitcoin 1 million. That's my goal. And I don't see what's going to force me to sell my Bitcoin. Not much, right? I believe really in Bitcoin's long-term future. And I think you should too. I think you should be, and again, if you don't need the income, this fund's not for you. If you don't want income, fund's not for you. If you're, if you, on the other hand, you need to augment your salary, or you are beyond your working years, then fine, go for it. So I think there, in the same way, there are people interesting. Bitcoin goes to 50K, nothing happens. So that's what happens. Nothing, zero, right? Like, I'll give you an example. Let's say Bitcoin goes to 50K tomorrow. What happens? Well, we have no leverage on the fund. We'll have under 10% leverage by the end of the year. So Bitcoin goes to 50K by the end of the year. Well, we'd have 20% loan to value. That's it. Not even, right? We'd have 15% loan to value. Nothing. No problem, no worries, nothing. So I don't think there's a problem with Bitcoin going to 50,000 at all. You know, it's interesting. Somebody was posted on Twitter that, he's a financial advisor, and he said he's got all these clients who call him, and they've got these 3% mortgages, and they're saying, I want to pay off my mortgage. And he's like, no, you should keep your mortgage. He goes, yeah, I know, but I don't like the debt. So if you don't like the debt, and great. Now, listen, I understand that mentality because I'm a little bit that way. I actually have only recently ever taken a mortgage out on any property, and I've owned a lot of houses, but I just bought them cash always because I had the cash, and I was like, I don't need debt. And finally, my business manager said, "Listen, Fred, why don't we get you at least $1 million mortgage?" And I said, "Fine." So yeah. But I do think that in this world that we're heading in, the one thing you don't want to do is sell your Bitcoin. So if you can avoid not selling your Bitcoin, and you can live, if you find some other way of doing this without selling your Bitcoin, great. Uh, uh, the other thing I would be very careful of is selling your upside, right? So a lot of people are like, well, I'll just sell call options and generate income like that. Well, the problem is you never know when we're going to have a 2017 year, right? That just goes completely nuts. Maybe it's 2026. We don't know. But if you sell, short dated call options against your Bitcoin to try to harvest a lot of money, I think you could be giving up all your upside. So I'm anti selling off your upside. I think you need to keep your upside. And I think, options are tricky, the only time I've lost money in Bitcoin is by buying Bitcoin options that expired worthless. And so, I'm not saying it's terrible. But I personally, I think most people should not play in options. I think most people should just buy Bitcoin, sit on it, and do nothing, or buy Bitcoin and borrow very conservatively against their Bitcoin. That's what I think. Here's one: if China is winning the AI race, they're not winning the AI race, and they reject BTC. This is very pernicious for me. I think Bitcoin's going to be great regardless of this. Anyways, I got to hop, but I hope you guys have enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, hit me up on Twitter.